She expected me to leave quietly, watching with satisfaction as my clothes hit the ground. But instead of packing, I handed her the eviction notice because the house was already in my name. I never imagined I'd be standing in my backyard on a sunny Sunday afternoon watching smoke rise from a burning pile of my belongings, while my mother-in-law smiled triumphantly through our kitchen window. The acrid smell of burning fabric mixed with the lingering aroma of our weekly family brunch, creating a nauseating reminder of how quickly life can unravel. My name is Rachel Chen, and this is the story of how a Sunday tradition became the catalyst for reclaiming my life. 3 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 28, newly married to James Sullivan, and living in a beautiful Victorian house in the historic district of Charleston, South Carolina. The house had been in James's family for generations, passed down through a long line of proud Southern women who had maintained its glory through wars, hurricanes, and changing times. Now it was my turn to be its caretaker, or so I thought. From the moment I first stepped through those ornate double doors as James's wife, I felt the weight of history and expectations settle onto my shoulders. The antique furnishings, the carefully preserved wallpaper, the crystal chandeliers that had illuminated countless family gatherings. Everything had a story, a proper way of being maintained, a tradition that couldn't be broken. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Sullivan, made sure I understood the gravity of my role. She lived just 3 houses down the street, in an equally impressive home she'd inherited after my father-in-law's passing. Every Sunday without fail, she would arrive precisely at 10 for our family brunch, dressed impeccably in her designer suits and pearls, her silver hair styled perfectly, her critical eyes missing nothing. The Sullivan women have hosted Sunday brunch for over a century, she'd remind me constantly, adjusting table settings I'd spent hours arranging. We didn't survive Sherman's march through Georgia to serve cold mimosas or improperly starched napkins. I tried my best to live up to her standards. I learned to make her famous cheese grit soufflé, memorized the correct way to polish the family silver, and studied the genealogy of every portrait hanging in our formal dining room. I even gave up my job as an art teacher at the local elementary school because Eleanor insisted that a Sullivan woman's primary focus should be her home and family. James supported his mother's vision, though in a gentler way. "Baby, you don't need to work," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "I make more than enough at the firm, and Mom's right. This house needs a full-time caretaker." He'd grown up with these traditions, these expectations. To him, they were as natural as breathing. At first I convinced myself I was living a fairy tale. The house was undeniably beautiful, and I did take pride in maintaining it. I threw myself into learning the family recipes, planning elaborate dinner parties, and keeping everything just as Eleanor thought it should be. I even started dressing differently, trading my colorful artist's wardrobe for the proper pearls and twin sets that Eleanor deemed appropriate. But beneath the perfect facade, cracks were beginning to show. I missed the joy of teaching, the creative freedom of my art, the simple pleasure of wearing clothes that expressed my personality. The house, which had initially felt like a privilege to care for, began to feel more like a museum where I was both curator and exhibit. Sunday brunches became increasingly tense affairs. Eleanor would arrive early, ostensibly to help, but really to inspect every detail of my preparation. She'd run her finger along the mantelpiece checking for dust, adjust the temperature of the coffee to her liking, and rearrange the fresh flowers I'd carefully selected from our garden. "Rachel, dear," she'd say, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The azaleas really should be trimmed at a 45-degree angle. And do try to remember that we serve the mint juleps in the crystal glasses from Great Aunt Margaret, not these modern things you've set out." I bore it all with a smile, trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law, the worthy custodian of the Sullivan legacy. But each criticism, each correction, each subtle dig at my background. I was born in California to Chinese-American parents, a fact Eleanor never let me forget, chipped away at my sense of self. James would squeeze my hand under the table when his mother's comments became particularly cutting, but he never contradicted her. "That's just Mom's way," he'd say later. "She means well. She just wants to make sure we maintain the family standards." But as the months turned into years, those standards began to feel like bars on a gilded cage. I stopped painting altogether. Eleanor had made it clear that the smell of oils and turpentine had no place in a historic home. My art supplies gathered dust in the attic, along with other remnants of my former life that didn't fit the Sullivan image. I lost touch with most of my friends from my teaching days. Eleanor had her own ideas about suitable social connections, and my old colleagues didn't make the cut. Instead, my social circle became filled with other Sullivan family friends, women who lived similar lives of perfectly maintained homes and carefully curated appearances. What no one saw, what I barely admitted to myself, was how lonely I'd become, how much of myself I'd lost in trying to become the perfect Sullivan wife. But everything was about to change, and it would start, as so many things did in my life, with a Sunday brunch. The first signs that something was seriously wrong began appearing in subtle ways, like hairline cracks in fine china, It started the day Eleanor brought over a stack of leather-bound photo albums, ostensibly to help me understand the Sullivan legacy better. As we sat in the carefully preserved Victorian parlor, she flipped through pages of Sullivan family history, pointing out how every woman in their lineage had maintained the same aesthetic, the same traditions, the same way of life. "Notice how every Sullivan bride wore the same shade of ivory?" she said, tapping a sepia-toned photograph. "Not white. White is so common. And see how they all maintain their figure even after children? A Sullivan woman never lets herself go." Her eyes lingered meaningfully on my frame, which had softened slightly since giving up my active teaching career for the sedentary life of a society wife. That evening, I found myself studying my reflection in the antique mirror that had witnessed generations of Sullivan women before me. My dark hair, which I'd always worn long and flowing, suddenly seemed out of place among the generations of perfectly coiffed Southern belles. The jade pendant my grandmother had given me, a family heirloom of my own, looked foreign against the backdrop of Georgian-style wallpaper and gilt-framed portraits. The next morning, I discovered Eleanor had helpfully scheduled an appointment for me with her hairstylist. "Just a little trim," she said when I called to question it. "And perhaps some highlights, something more appropriate for a Sullivan wife." I canceled the appointment, but the message was clear. I wasn't fitting the mold. The incidents began piling up. Eleanor started dropping by unannounced, always finding something that needed fixing. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets, because that's how Margaret always organized them. She replaced the contemporary artwork I'd hung in the guest room with ancestral portraits, claiming the modern pieces disturbed the home's energy. Each change felt like another piece of me being erased. James noticed my growing discomfort, but struggled to understand it. "Mom's just trying to help," he'd say, his voice taking on that placating tone I was beginning to hate. "She wants us to honor the family traditions. Besides, don't the rooms look better with the portraits?" But it wasn't just about the decor. Eleanor's influence began seeping into every aspect of our lives. She had opinions about everything: what I cooked, what I wore, how I spoke, even how I walked. "A Sullivan woman glides," she'd say, demonstrating the proper posture. "She doesn't bounce around like a public school teacher." The breaking point came during a dinner party we were hosting for James's law firm partners. I'd spent days preparing, determined to prove I could handle a Sullivan social event perfectly. The table was set exactly as Eleanor had taught me. The menu followed Sullivan tradition to the letter, and I'd even worn one of the conservative dresses she'd suggested I buy. Everything was going smoothly until I brought out my grandmother's Chinese almond cookies for dessert alongside the traditional Sullivan pecan pie. Eleanor's face turned to stone. Later, after the guests had left, she cornered me in the kitchen. "What were you thinking?" she hissed, her perfectly maintained composure cracking. "Serving those ethnic desserts to James's colleagues? We have traditions, Rachel, traditions that have maintained this family's social position for generations. If you can't respect that, perhaps you're not cut out to be a Sullivan after all." I stood there, clutching my grandmother's cookie recipe, feeling something inside me begin to splinter. For the first time I spoke back. "These cookies are my tradition, Eleanor. My family's history matters too." The look she gave me was cold enough to freeze the Charleston summer heat. "Your family's history? Dear, when you married James, you became a Sullivan. That's the only history that matters now." That night, I couldn't sleep. I snuck down to the kitchen and baked another batch of almond cookies, filling the house with the comforting scent of my childhood. As I sat alone in the dark kitchen, savoring the familiar taste, I realized how much of myself I'd already lost. My art supplies gathering dust in the attic, my teaching career abandoned, my own family's traditions pushed aside, all to fit into Eleanor's vision of a Sullivan wife. The next day I found my cookie recipe in the trash, and all my baking supplies rearranged to Eleanor's specifications. It was a small thing really, just a piece of paper and some displaced mixing bowls. But sometimes the smallest things can be the final straw. The tiny crack that reveals the deep fissures beneath the surface. I retrieved the recipe, smoothed it out, and tucked it safely away in my journal. That night, for the first time, I admitted to myself that something was deeply wrong. Not just with Eleanor's behavior, but with the way I'd allowed myself to be slowly erased piece by piece, tradition by tradition, until I barely recognized myself anymore. The woman who stared back at me from the antique mirror wasn't just losing her identity. She was letting it be deliberately stripped away, one Sunday brunch at a time. Little did I know this realization was just the beginning of a storm that would soon tear through my carefully constructed life, starting with a brunch that would change everything. The pressure began mounting like a Charleston summer storm, slow, steady, and increasingly suffocating. Eleanor's campaign to mold me into the perfect Sullivan wife intensified after the cookie incident, but now she had a new angle. She started dropping hints about the house itself, weaving them into every conversation like poison ivy through a garden. "You know, dear," she said one afternoon while rearranging my living room furniture for the third time that week, "this house has a very specific energy. It's been home to Sullivan women who understood their role for generations. Sometimes, if the fit isn't right, The house itself seems to reject people. I was arranging flowers in a crystal vase, Eleanor's way of course, when she dropped this particular bomb. My hands stilled on the stems of the camellias. What do you mean reject people? Eleanor's smile was sharp as cut glass. Oh, just that some people aren't suited to the responsibilities of maintaining a Sullivan home. Take James's first girlfriend from college, for instance. She tried to paint the morning room a ghastly shade of yellow. Within a month, she developed terrible allergies, had to move out. She paused, eyeing my recent attempt to brighten up the kitchen with yellow curtains. The house knows what it wants, dear. The implications weren't subtle. Over the next few weeks, strange things began happening. I'd find windows mysteriously open after I was sure I'd closed them. Items moved from where I'd placed them. Doors that would suddenly stick or swing open on their own. Eleanor had an explanation for everything. The house is restless, she'd say, shaking her head sadly. It hasn't been this unsettled since 1923, when Great Aunt Catherine's husband tried to modernize the kitchen. Poor woman had to move back in with her mother until he saw reason. I tried to laugh it off, but the constant suggestions that I was somehow antagonizing a house began to wear on me. I started second-guessing everything I did, jumping at every creak and groan of the old structure. James, caught between his mother's superstitions and my growing unease, became increasingly distant. Maybe Mom has a point, he said one night after I complained about finding my art supplies moved yet again from the attic to the back porch. This house has been in the family for generations. It does seem to have its own personality, but I knew what was really happening. I'd caught glimpses of Eleanor letting herself in with her key when she thought no one was home. I'd seen her housekeeper Martha slipping out the back door on days when things had been mysteriously rearranged. The house wasn't rejecting me. Eleanor was orchestrating my gaslighting with the precision of a symphony conductor. The situation came to a head when I decided to host a small art show in our garden. I'd finally started painting again, setting up my easel in the sunroom when Eleanor was at her weekly bridge game. The paintings weren't traditional Sullivan-approved landscapes, but rather abstract expressions of everything I'd been feeling. The suffocation, the erasure, the rebellion brewing inside me. I invited my old colleagues from the elementary school, some local artists I'd met at the coffee shop, and even a gallery owner who'd expressed interest in my work. The afternoon was supposed to be my small step toward reclaiming my identity. Eleanor arrived just as I was setting up the displays. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the peaceful garden air. "Art shows in a Sullivan home? And these paintings?" She gestured dismissively at my work. "They look like something from one of those modern galleries. No character, no tradition, no understanding of proper Southern aesthetic. They're my paintings." "Eleanor," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "This is my home too, and I have a right to use it as I wish." Her laugh was like ice crackling. "Your home? Oh, my dear confused girl. This is a Sullivan home. It belongs to the family legacy, not to some California girl playing at being a Southern wife." She turned to James, who had just arrived home from work. "James, darling. Surely you can't allow this spectacle to continue. What would the neighbors think? What would your father say if he could see his home being turned into some sort of bohemian gallery?" I watched my husband's face, seeing him wrestle with the choice between supporting me and maintaining his family's precious reputation. "Maybe Mom's right, Rachel," he finally said, not meeting my eyes. "We should discuss this before making any changes to the house's atmosphere." "Changes to the atmosphere?" I repeated, disbelief coloring my voice. "James, she's trying to control every aspect of our lives. She's trying to erase everything about me that doesn't fit her perfect Sullivan mold." Eleanor's face hardened. "I think perhaps it's time we discussed alternative arrangements. Clearly, the pressure of maintaining a historic home is becoming too much for you. I have a lovely apartment above my carriage house. Much more suitable for someone of your background and temperament." The suggestion hung in the air like heavy Charleston humidity. She wasn't just trying to control me anymore. She was trying to remove me entirely, to relegate me to an auxiliary building, while she reclaimed the main house for herself. The realization struck me like a physical blow. All this time I'd thought she was trying to mold me into the perfect Sullivan wife, but her real goal was to prove I could never be one. After the art show confrontation, life in the Sullivan house became nearly unbearable. Eleanor's suggestion about the carriage house apartment wasn't just a casual idea. It was the opening shot in a war of attrition. She began leaving real estate listings on the kitchen counter, all for small apartments or condos, each one carefully annotated with notes like perfect for transitional living or ideal for someone finding their way. The psychological warfare escalated. One morning, I came downstairs to find Eleanor and 3 other Sullivan matriarchs having coffee in my kitchen. They fell silent when I entered, their eyes following me with practiced Southern disapproval. "Rachel dear," Eleanor's cousin Margaret drawled. "We were just discussing the summer cottage in Savannah. Remember how lovely it was when you and James visited last year? So cozy. Perfect for a young couple still finding their footing. I stood there in my own kitchen, still in my pajamas, feeling like an intruder. The women sipped their coffee from my grandmother's porcelain cups, the ones Eleanor had relegated to the back of the cabinet because they weren't Sullivan pieces, and continued their pointed conversation around me as if I were invisible. That evening, I confronted James about his mother's constant presence in our home. "She has a key for emergencies," he said, loosening his tie after a long day at the firm. "And she's just trying to help maintain the house's heritage." "Heritage?" I snapped, my patience finally breaking. "James, she's orchestrating a campaign to drive me out of my own home. Can't you see what's happening?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen more and more lately. "You're being paranoid, Rachel. Mom's lived in this neighborhood her whole life. She knows how these old houses need to be maintained. Maybe if you tried harder to understand our traditions." "Your traditions?" I interrupted. "What about my traditions? My heritage? Since when does living in a historic home mean erasing everything about myself?" "Nobody's asking you to erase yourself," he argued, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's just there are expectations, standards. The Sullivan name means something in Charleston." The next day, I found my art supplies had been packed into boxes and moved to the garden shed. When I demanded an explanation, Eleanor appeared as if by magic, her face a mask of innocent concern. "Oh, those old things. I had Martha move them. The attic needs to be reorganized. We're bringing over some of the family archives. You understand, of course. Family history must be preserved." I unpacked my supplies and brought them back inside, setting up my easel in the morning room, a small act of defiance. By evening, everything had been moved again, this time to the carriage house Eleanor kept mentioning. "It's a much better space for artistic pursuits," she said smoothly when I confronted her. "The light is lovely there, and it would give you more freedom to express yourself without worrying about damaging the main house's ambiance." The situation began affecting my health. I started having trouble sleeping, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. I lost weight, my clothes hanging loose on my frame. Even my hair started falling out in clumps, probably from the stress. But every time I tried to talk to James about it, he became more distant. "Maybe you should see someone," he suggested one night. "Mom knows a wonderful therapist. She helped James's sister when she was having similar adjustment issues." I remembered meeting James's sister at our wedding, a quiet, almost ghostly woman, who lived in a small apartment above her mother's garage, teaching piano lessons and never quite meeting anyone's eyes. Was this the future Eleanor had planned for me? Another Sullivan wife properly contained and controlled? The final straw came when I discovered Eleanor had been systematically going through my closet, removing pieces she deemed unsuitable for a Sullivan wife, and replacing them with clothes more to her taste. I found my favorite red silk dress, a gift from my mother, wadded up in a donation box in the garage. When I rescued it, Eleanor appeared in the garage doorway, her shadow falling over me like a frost. "Really, dear? That dress was hardly appropriate. Red is so aggressive. A Sullivan woman favors pastels, gentle colors that don't draw attention." "I'm not getting rid of my clothes, Eleanor," I said, clutching the dress to my chest. Her smile was cold as a January morning. "No? Well, perhaps it's time we discussed more permanent solutions to this situation. James and I have been talking." My blood ran cold. "You've been talking to my husband about my clothes?" "About everything, dear. Your resistance to tradition, your unsuitable artistic pursuits, your inability to maintain proper standards. James understands that sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the good of the family name." I stormed inside to find James, my hands shaking. He was in his study, surrounded by old family photographs Eleanor had recently discovered and insisted on displaying. "Have you been discussing me with your mother, making plans about my future without consulting me?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom's just concerned, Rachel. We all are. You've been acting erratic lately, emotional. Maybe some time in the carriage house would be good for you, give you space to adjust." In that moment, I saw my future with crystal clarity. They were trying to relegate me to the same fate as James's sister, a Sullivan wife properly contained, controlled, and eventually erased. The walls of the historic home seemed to close in around me, its antique mirrors reflecting a woman I barely recognized anymore. That night, I lay awake in our four-poster bed listening to the house settle around me. Every creak felt like a warning, every shadow a reminder of the forces aligning against me. Sunday brunch was approaching, Eleanor's weekly ritual of control and criticism. But this time, something would have to give. I just didn't realize how explosive that giving would be. That Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect Charleston day that usually graced the pages of Southern Living magazine. I'd been up since dawn, mechanically going through the motions of preparing for our weekly brunch. The silver was polished. The table set exactly as Eleanor demanded, the cheese grit soufflé baking in the oven. Everything was perfect, just as it had been every Sunday for the past 3 years. But something was different. Maybe it was the way my hands shook as I arranged the magnolia centerpiece, or how the familiar weight of my grandmother's jade pendant felt more like armor than decoration. I'd worn it deliberately today, along with a crimson silk blouse Eleanor had tried to donate twice before. Small acts of defiance, but they made me feel more like myself than I had in months. Eleanor arrived at exactly 10, letting herself in without knocking. She paused in the doorway of the dining room, her eyes narrowing at my appearance. "Oh, Rachel dear. That blouse again? And those ethnic accessories? Really? On a Sunday?" I kept arranging flowers, pretending not to notice how she adjusted every place setting I'd carefully positioned. James appeared from his study, already wearing the worried expression that had become his default whenever his mother and I were in the same room. "Everything looks lovely," he said, trying to diffuse the tension. "Doesn't it, Mom?" Eleanor's smile was sharp as cut glass. "Almost lovely. Though I did bring over some proper linens from the main house. These," she gestured dismissively at the tablecloth I'd selected, "are a bit common for a Sullivan table." Before I could respond, Martha, Eleanor's housekeeper, appeared with several boxes. "Where would you like these, Mrs. Sullivan?" "Just in the carriage house, Martha. Rachel will be needing them soon enough." Eleanor's voice dripped with satisfaction. "I've taken the liberty of preparing the apartment for you, dear. Everything's ready whenever you are." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "Preparing the apartment? What are you talking about?" "Mom's just trying to help," James interjected quickly. "We've been talking, and given how stressed you've been lately, maybe sometime in the carriage house would be good for you. Just until you're feeling more settled." I looked between them, realization dawning. "You've already moved my things, haven't you? That's what all those boxes Martha's been carrying are about." Eleanor's smile widened. "Just the non-essential items, dear. Things that don't really belong in the main house. Your art supplies. Those colorful clothes that aren't quite Huck Sullivan standard. The apartment is much more suitable for your particular tastes." The cheese grit souffle chose that moment a timer went off, its cheerful ding incongruous with the mounting tension. I walked to the kitchen on autopilot, my mind racing. They'd been planning this, orchestrating my removal from my own home piece by piece. When I returned with the souffle, Eleanor was directing Martha to rearrange the dining room furniture. "The morning light will be much better. This way," she was saying, "once Rachel's things are cleared out, we can finally restore this room to its proper glory." Something inside me snapped. 3 years of suppressed anger, frustration, and hurt came rushing to the surface. I set the souffle down with deliberate care. "I'm not moving to the carriage house, Eleanor." The room went silent. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand paused on the back of a chair. "I don't think you understand, dear. This isn't a request. James and I have discussed it, and we feel I don't care what you and James have discussed," I interrupted, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "This is my home too. I'm not going to be tucked away in your carriage house like some embarrassing family secret." "Rachel," James started, but I cut him off. "No, James. I've listened to everyone else long enough. This ends now." I turned back to Eleanor. "You can't force me out of my own home." Eleanor's facade of southern gentility cracked. "Your home? This house has belonged to the Sullivan family for generations. You're just a temporary occupant who clearly doesn't understand or respect our traditions." "Your traditions?" I laughed, the sound harsh and foreign to my ears. "Your traditions are about control, Eleanor, about erasing anything and anyone who doesn't fit your perfect Sullivan mold. Well, I'm done being erased." She moved toward me, her heels clicking ominously on the hardwood floor. "You ungrateful little," she caught herself, smoothing her expression. "James, darling, I think it's time you took control of this situation. Your wife is clearly having some sort of episode." I looked at my husband, silently pleading with him to finally take my side. He shifted uncomfortably, straightening his bow tie, another Sullivan tradition I'd grown to hate. "Rachel, maybe Mom's right. You haven't been yourself lately. Some time in the carriage house might help you adjust." At that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. I saw with perfect clarity what my future would be if I didn't take a stand now. A slow fade into insignificance, another Sullivan wife properly contained and controlled. I walked to the window and watched Martha carrying more boxes to the carriage house. My life was being packed away, eliminated box by box while we stood around preparing to eat cheese grit souffle and make polite conversation. "No," I said, again, turning to face them. "I won't be adjusting and I won't be moving. This is my home too, and I'm staying right here." Eleanor's mask dropped completely. "We'll see about that." She snapped her fingers at Martha. "Bring everything from the carriage house. Everything." It's time Rachel understood exactly how this family deals with opposition. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, like one of those Southern Gothic nightmares where everything moves through thick, humid air. Eleanor stood in the dining room, her perfect posture rigid with fury, as Martha began bringing in box after box of my belongings. The carefully curated Sunday brunch lay forgotten on the table, the cheese grits souffle cooling in its crystal dish. "Mother," Maybe we should discuss this later, James attempted, his voice wavering. But Eleanor was beyond discussion. No, James. Your wife wants to make a stand. Let's see how well she stands without all these inappropriate items, cluttering up a Sullivan home. She began pulling things from the boxes, my art supplies, my books, my clothes. Everything that made me who I was, scattered across the polished hardwood floors like debris after a storm. These fashion choices alone are an affront to Sullivan. Tradition, Eleanor declared, holding up my favorite red silk dress as if it were evidence in a trial. No Sullivan woman would be caught dead in such garish colors. She tossed it aside and reached for more. And these paints and canvases, making a mess of a historic home, absolutely unacceptable. I watched in horror as she systematically went through my possessions, providing running commentary on each item's unsuitability for a Sullivan wife. My collection of contemporary art books, modern garbage. My mother's hand-embroidered silk scarves, ethnic clutter. My sketchbooks filled with years of drawings, amateur scribblings. James stood frozen watching his mother dismember my life, piece by piece. Mom, that's enough, he said weakly. But Eleanor was on a mission. Martha, she commanded. Take all of this out to the garden, every last piece. Martha hesitated, looking between Eleanor and me. In her eyes I saw a flicker of sympathy quickly hidden. She'd worked for the Sullivan family for decades. She knew what happened to people who defied Eleanor. Now Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. As Martha began gathering my belongings, I found my voice. Stop. Those are my things. You have no right. I have every right. Eleanor's composure shattered completely. This is a Sullivan home, and I will not stand by while you destroy everything we've built with your California bohemian nonsense. She grabbed another box, this one containing my most precious possessions. The jewelry my grandmother had brought from China, photographs of my family, letters from my parents. When she started pulling them out, something inside me broke free. Don't you dare touch those. I lunged forward, but James caught my arm. Rachel, calm down. You're getting hysterical. Hysterical. The word hit me like a physical blow. How many times had Eleanor used that same word to dismiss my feelings, my objections, my very identity? I wrenched my arm free, and watched as Eleanor carried my belongings toward the garden. Martha followed with more boxes, her face carefully blank. Through the French doors I could see Eleanor directing her to create a pile on the manicured lawn. Mother, what are you doing? James finally seemed to realize things had gone too far. Eleanor pulled something from her handbag, a silver cigarette lighter, a Sullivan family heirloom she'd often told me stories about. Teaching your wife a lesson about defying Sullivan traditions. The flame caught the edge of my red silk dress first. The material ignited quickly. The fire spreading to the pile of my artwork, my books, my memories. The smoke rose thick and black against the perfect Sunday sky, carrying the ashes of my identity up into the Charleston air. There, Eleanor said, satisfaction dripping from her voice. Now you have nothing left that doesn't fit the Sullivan image. You can either accept who you need to be, or you can leave with nothing. Your choice, dear. I stood in the doorway watching the flames consume everything I'd brought into this marriage. The heat on my face felt like a fever, but inside, I was cold with clarity. This wasn't just about my possessions. This was Eleanor's final play. Burn away everything that made me Rachel Chen, leaving only the hollow shell of a Sullivan wife. James finally moved, rushing toward the garden. Mom, this is insane. We can't what, James? Can't protect our family's legacy? Can't maintain our standards? Your father would be ashamed of how weak you've become. The mention of his father stopped James in his tracks. I watched my husband deflate, retreat, become once again the dutiful son rather than my partner. In that moment, I saw our entire marriage for what it really was. A carefully orchestrated performance with Eleanor as the director, and James and I merely playing our assigned roles. The flames rose higher, and with them, something else rose inside me. Not panic, not fear, but a strange calm certainty. I reached up and unclasped my grandmother's jade pendant, the last piece of my true self I was wearing. Eleanor's eyes followed the movement, anticipating one final victory. Instead, I clutched the pendant tightly and walked toward the house. Not the carriage house where they wanted to banish me, but toward the grand front door of the Sullivan family home. Behind me, I could hear Eleanor's triumphant voice. Finally, she understands her place, but she was wrong. I understood something entirely different, and it would change everything. Inside the house, the dining room still held the perfect tableau of our abandoned Sunday brunch. Crystal glasses caught the light, throwing rainbow prisms on the wallpaper. The cheese grit soufflé sat untouched, slowly collapsing in on itself like my former life. Through the windows I could see the smoke from my burning possessions staining the pristine Charleston sky. I moved through the rooms with newfound clarity, seeing everything as if for the first time. The antique mirrors that had witnessed countless Sullivan wives being molded and shaped into acceptable forms. The portraits of stern-faced matriarchs who had maintained the family's precious traditions through war, recession, and social change. The carefully preserved furniture that had been arranged just so for generations. Behind me I could hear Eleanor's voice in the garden, still directing the destruction of my life with clinical precision. Make sure everything burns completely. Martha, we don't want any remnants. I climbed the stairs to what had been my bedroom, our bedroom, for the past 3 years. The 4-poster bed with its heirloom quilt. The vanity where I'd spent countless hours trying to style my hair the Sullivan way. The closet where my clothes had been gradually replaced with Eleanor-approved pieces in acceptable pastels and subtle patterns. My hands were steady as I opened the hidden compartment at the back of my dresser drawer, the one place Eleanor hadn't yet discovered and purged. Inside was a small lacquered box my mother had given me on my wedding day. Keep your treasures safe, she'd said. Her eyes worried even then. Never let anyone take away who you are. The box contained the things I'd known somehow to protect. My passport, my birth certificate, the jade ring my grandmother had passed down through generations of Chen women, and a small savings account booklet in my name only. I'd opened the account 6 months ago, squirreling away small amounts from the household budget Eleanor so generously allowed me to manage. As I held these fragments of my identity, the full magnitude of what I'd lost hit me. My art supplies, years of sketches and paintings that had kept me sane in this beautiful prison. My books, windows to worlds beyond these suffocating walls. My clothes, each piece chosen to express something of myself, now reduced to ashes in Eleanor's immaculate garden. But worse than the material losses were the intangible ones. 3 years of my life spent trying to contort myself into a shape that could never fit. My confidence eroded by constant criticism and correction. My voice silenced by the weight of Sullivan traditions. My marriage revealed now as nothing more than an extension of Eleanor's control. James appeared in the Yi doorway, his bow tie askew, face flushed from the heat of the fire below. Rachel, please. Mom's just upset. Once everything calms down, what? I turned to face him, my voice steady. We'll go back to pretending? You'll keep watching while she erases me piece by piece? Tell me, James, what exactly will be left of me to calm down? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it almost broke my heart. Almost. You're not being fair. Mom has certain standards, expectations. This house, this family. This house is a museum, I interrupted. And your mother is its curator. And I'm done being just another exhibit. What are you saying? His voice held a note of panic now. I looked around the room one last time, seeing it clearly for what it was. Not a home, but a mausoleum where Sullivan wives came to bury their true selves. I'm saying that your mother can keep her perfect house and her precious traditions. She can keep the silver and the crystal and the proper way to fold napkins. She can even keep you, James, since you've made it clear whose side you're on. There aren't sides, Rachel. This is family. No, James. This isn't family. This is ownership, control, and I'm done being owned. From the garden below, Eleanor's voice carried up sharp with triumph. There. That's the last of it. Now perhaps we can restore some proper order to this house. I clutched my small box of treasures to my chest and moved toward the door. James stepped aside automatically. Even now, Sullivan manners ran deep. Where are you going? Isn't it obvious? I'm doing what your mother wants. I'm leaving her perfect house. But I'm not going to her carriage house apartment. I'm not going to be another one of her successes. Another Sullivan wife properly contained and controlled. You can't just leave, he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. What about our marriage? Our life together? I paused at the top of the stairs looking back at him. What life together, James? We've been living your mother's life following her script. I don't even know who we are without her direction. The smoke from the garden had begun to drift into the house through the open windows, carrying with it the acrid smell of burning fabric, paper, memories. But instead of grief, I felt something unexpected: freedom. Every possession Eleanor had burned was one less thing tying me to this gilded cage. As I descended the stairs, I could hear Eleanor in the dining room, already planning how to rearrange everything now that the distasteful elements had been removed. Her voice carried that particular note of satisfaction I'd come to know so well. The sound of a Sullivan victory. Another threat to tradition successfully neutralized. But she was about to learn that she hadn't quite won. Not this time. The sound of my heels on the hardwood floors echoed through the Sullivan house as I descended the grand staircase one last time. Each step felt like crossing a threshold, moving from one life into another. The small lacquered box containing my remaining possessions was clutched tightly against my chest, my grandmother's jade pendant cool against my skin. Eleanor stood in the dining room doorway, silhouetted against the morning light, looking every inch the Sullivan matriarch she prided herself on being. Her eyes fell to the box in my hands, and her lips curved into a satisfied smile. Finally seeing reason, dear? Martha has the carriage house ready for you. Once you've had time to reflect on your behavior, we can discuss appropriate ways to rebuild your wardrobe, something more suitable for a Sullivan wife. I almost laughed at her confidence, at how completely she misread the situation. No, Eleanor. I'm not going to the carriage house. I'm leaving. Her smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes. Don't be dramatic, Rachel. Where would you go? You have nothing left. Everything you owned that wasn't appropriate has been dealt with. She gestured toward the garden, where the last wisps of smoke rose from the ashes of my former life. That's where you're wrong, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my chest. You haven't taken everything. You couldn't burn away who I am, Eleanor, no matter how hard you tried. James appeared at the top of the stairs, his footsteps heavy. Rachel, please. Let's just calm down and discuss this like rational people. Rational? I turned to face him. Was it rational to let your mother systematically destroy everything I owned? Was it rational to stand by while she tried to erase every trace of who I am? Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. Everything I've done has been for the good of this family. You came into this house, this legacy, knowing nothing about proper society, proper behavior. I've tried to help you, to mold you into someone worthy of the Sullivan name. Worthy. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. I was worthy before I ever set foot in this house. I was a teacher, an artist, a woman with my own dreams and identity. You didn't try to help me, Eleanor. You tried to destroy me and replace me with another perfect Sullivan puppet. The sound of car doors slamming outside drew our attention. Through the front windows, I could see several cars pulling up. The rest of the Sullivan family arriving for their traditional Sunday brunch. Eleanor's expression shifted from anger to calculation. Well, if you insist on making a scene, perhaps you should do it in front of everyone. Let the whole family see exactly what James married. She moved toward the front door, ready to welcome her audience. I felt a moment of panic. The thought of facing the entire Sullivan clan, of having my departure become another piece of family gossip to be dissected over cheese grits and mint juleps, made my stomach turn. But then I looked at the ashes in the garden, at the remains of everything I'd brought into this marriage, and found strength in the very losses meant to break me. Go ahead, Eleanor. Call them in. Let them all see what you've done. Let them see how the great Sullivan family maintains its precious traditions by burning away anything that doesn't fit their perfect mold. She paused, hand on the doorknob. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. Outside, voices approached the front porch, the familiar murmur of Sullivan family gossip. You wouldn't dare make a scene, Eleanor said, but her voice held a note of doubt. Wouldn't I? What do I have left to lose? You've already burned everything else. James moved between us, his face pale. Both of you, please. The family's here. We need to maintain appearances. Appearances, I echoed. That's all you care about, isn't it? Both of you. The perfect Sullivan facade. Well, I'm done performing for your family's approval. I walked to the front door, pushing past Eleanor's outstretched arm. On the porch stood the assembled Sullivan clan, aunts, uncles, cousins, all dressed in their Sunday best, all ready for another performance of perfect family harmony. Aunt Margaret was the first to speak, her eyes widening at my appearance. Rachel, dear, are you quite all right? What's that dreadful smell of smoke? I looked at their perfectly composed faces, their coordinated outfits, their practiced expressions of concern. 3 years ago, I had wanted so desperately to be accepted by these people. Now I saw them clearly, prisoners of their own traditions, each one as carefully maintained and controlled as the antiques in their historic homes. The smell, I said clearly, my voice carrying across the porch, is the smell of my belongings burning in the garden. Your beloved Eleanor decided that anything not meeting Sullivan's standards needed to be destroyed. Would anyone like to see what's left of my life? A collective gasp went up from the assembled family. Eleanor moved forward, her hand gripping my arm. Rachel, you're clearly hysterical. Why don't we get you settled in the carriage house where you can rest? I wrenched my arm free, feeling the sting of her manicured nails as they scraped my skin. Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again. The facade of Southern gentility began to crack as realization dawned on the family's faces. This wasn't going to be another carefully managed Sullivan crisis. This was something real, raw, and completely outside their control. James appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of embarrassment and confusion. Rachel, please think about what you're doing. I was thinking about it. For the first time in 3 years, I was thinking with complete clarity, standing there on the porch of the grand Sullivan house, surrounded by the family that had tried to remake me in their image. I felt something unexpected, pity. Pity for these people so trapped by their own traditions, that they couldn't see the prison they'd built for themselves. The Sullivan family stood frozen on the porch, their Sunday best now wilting in the Charleston heat, and the tension of the why moment. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, a pungent reminder of Eleanor's destructive display of power. In the awkward silence, the sound of another car pulling into the driveway drew everyone's attention. A sleek black BMW parked behind the row of luxury vehicles, and out stepped Catherine Sullivan Ross, James's cousin and the family's black sheep. I'd only met her once at our wedding, where she'd caused a minor scandal by wearing a pantsuit instead of the traditional Sullivan wedding attire. Eleanor had managed to keep her out of most family photos. Catherine took in the scene before her, the assembled family on the porch, the smoke rising from the garden, my defiant stance, and Eleanor's barely contained fury. A knowing smile crossed her face. "Well, well," she drawled, climbing the steps with deliberate grace. "Looks like someone's finally standing up to the Sullivan succession of terror." "Catherine?" Eleanor's voice could have frozen the summer air. "This is a private family matter." "Oh, but I am family, Aunt Eleanor. One you couldn't quite manage to erase despite your best efforts." Catherine turned to me, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Though it looks like you tried your usual tactics with Rachel here. Burning possessions now, are we? That's new. Usually you stick to metaphorical character assassination." Several of the assembled Sullivans shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Margaret clutched her pearls, while Uncle George suddenly became very interested in his phone. They all knew what had happened to Catherine 5 years ago, when she'd refused to divorce her artist husband and take up her proper place in Charleston society. "This doesn't concern you," Eleanor snapped, but Catherine was already moving to stand beside me. "Actually, I think it does. You see, I recognize that look in Rachel's eyes. It's the same one I had when I finally realized what this family does to people who don't fit their precious mold." She turned to address the family at large. "How many of you are going to stand here and pretend this is normal? That destroying someone's belongings because they won't conform is just another charming Sullivan tradition?" James stepped forward, his lawyer's instincts finally kicking in. "Catherine, you don't understand the situation. Rachel's been difficult. Mom's just trying to help her adjust." "Adjust?" Catherine's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Is that what we're calling it now? Funny how the Sullivan family's version of help always involves destroying whatever makes someone unique." She turned to me. "Do you have somewhere to go?" The question caught me off guard. In my determination to leave, I hadn't thought beyond getting out of the house. My parents were in California, and Eleanor had made sure I lost touch with most of my local friends. I clutched my small box of remaining possessions tighter. "She has nowhere to go," Eleanor said smugly. "Which is why the carriage house she has somewhere," Catherine interrupted. "My guest house is empty. And unlike your carriage house prison, it comes with no strings attached." She pulled out her keys and removed one, holding it out to, "It's in Mount Pleasant, far enough from Charleston to be out of Sullivan territory." Eleanor's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You have no right to interfere. Rachel is my daughter-in-law, and what?" Catherine's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Your property? Another Sullivan wife to be properly molded and controlled? How did that work out with James's sister or my mother or any of the other women who've disappeared into the Sullivan family machine?" Her words hit home. Around us, the assembled family members began to stir uneasily. I saw recognition in some of their eyes, particularly the younger generation. How many of them had watched their mothers, their aunts, their sisters slowly fade away under the weight of Sullivan traditions? Martha appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. In her hands she held something I recognized, my mother's old recipe book, which I'd thought lost in the fire. I saved what I could, Mrs. Rachel," she said quietly, defying Eleanor for the first time in 30 years of service. "It ain't right burning someone's memories." Eleanor whirled on her. "Martha, get back inside immediately." But Martha stood her ground, stepping forward to hand me the book. "My mama worked for the Sullivans too. Watch them do this same thing generation after generation. It ain't right, and it ain't ever been right." The cookbook felt warm in my hands, its pages slightly singed but intact. Inside were not just recipes, but notes from my mother. Snippets of my family's history. Pieces of who I was before I became a Sullivan wife. Martha had saved more than just a book. She'd saved a piece of my identity. Catherine placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "The guest house key is yours if you want it. No expectations, no rules, no Sullivan traditions to maintain. Just a safe place to figure out your next steps." I looked at James standing helplessly between his mother and me. "Are you going to say anything? Do anything?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at his mother. In that moment of hesitation, I had my answer. James would always be Eleanor's son first, my husband second. "Your car's still in the garage, right?" Catherine asked. "Why don't we get your things?" "She has no things left to get," Eleanor cut in, a note of triumph in her voice. "Everything unsuitable has been dealt with." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Everything except her spirit, it seems. And that's the one thing you've never been able to destroy, Aunt Eleanor, no matter how hard you try." I straightened my spine, feeling stronger with every passing moment. "My car keys are in my purse, one of the few things I managed to keep from the fire, and I have everything I need right here." I held up the small lacquered box and the rescued cookbook. "Everything else you can keep, Eleanor." Consider it the price of my freedom. The walk to my car felt like crossing a battlefield. Eleanor's carefully manicured garden, usually a showcase of southern horticultural perfection, was now scarred by the black circle where my possessions had burned. The acrid smell of smoke still hung in the air, mixing with the sweet scent of magnolias. A peculiarly southern combination of destruction and gentility. Catherine walked beside me, her presence a shield against the stares of the Sullivan family members who still stood on the porch, torn between their ingrained politeness and their desperate curiosity. Martha had disappeared back into the house, but not before pressing a small package wrapped in a kitchen towel into my hands. "Some provisions," she'd whispered. "And my phone number, if you need anything." As I reached for my car door, James finally found his voice. "Rachel, wait." He jogged down the garden path, his bow tie now completely undone. His perfect Sullivan composure crumbling. "You can't just leave like this. We can work something out. Mom will calm down, and will she?" I turned to face him. "Will she calm down, James? Or will she just find more subtle ways to erase me? More acceptable ways to turn me into another perfect Sullivan wife?" "You're being melodramatic," he said, but his eyes flickered to the burning circle on the lawn. "Mom has her ways, but she means well. Everything she does is for the family." Catherine's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, James. Still reciting Eleanor's lines after all these years? Tell me, cousin. Do you even know who you are without your mother's script?" Eleanor's voice cut across the garden. "James Sullivan, you get back here this instant. If your wife wants to throw away everything we've given her, let her go. She'll soon realize what she's losing." I watched James's face, saw the moment he chose his mother over me again. It should have hurt more, but somehow it felt like the final confirmation I needed. Our marriage had never been about love or partnership. It had been about maintaining the Sullivan legacy. "You know what the saddest part is, James?" I said softly. "I actually loved you. Not the Sullivan heir, not the perfect Southern gentleman, but you. I thought if I tried hard enough, if I changed enough, I could help you find yourself under all those layers of tradition and expectation. But you have to want to be found." His face crumpled slightly, showing a glimpse of the man I'd first fallen in love with. The one who'd once talked about opening his own small-town practice instead of joining his father's prestigious firm. The one who'd admired my paintings before Eleanor convinced him they were too modern for a Sullivan home. "Rachel, please," he started, but I was already sliding into my car. The engine started with a purr. One thing Eleanor hadn't managed to touch. As I backed down the driveway, I caught a last glimpse of the scene in my rearview mirror. James, standing lost in the garden, Eleanor triumphant on the porch, the Sullivan family clustered in confused groups, and Catherine offering a small salute of solidarity. "Turn left at the end of the drive," Catherine said from the passenger seat. "Place is about 20 minutes away, and I know a route that avoids most of the Sullivan-occupied areas of Charleston." The fact that such routes existed, that Catherine had mapped them out, spoke volumes about the family's influence in this city. As we drove, the grand historic homes gave way to more modern developments. The weight of tradition lightening with each mile. "You know she'll spread her version of events through every social circle in Charleston," Catherine said after a while. "The Sullivans excel at character assassination. By dinner time, half of South Carolina will have heard about how you had some sort of breakdown and attacked poor Eleanor's precious traditions." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I don't care what story she tells. I'm done living my life for Sullivan approval." "Good." Catherine nodded. "But you should care about protecting yourself. Eleanor's influence runs deep in this town. She'll try to make it impossible for you to find work, to rebuild your life here." The reality of my situation began to sink in. I had no job, no clothes, except what I was wearing, and only the small amount I'd managed to save in my secret account. The weight of it should have been crushing, but instead, I felt strangely light. "Then I won't rebuild my life here," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Charleston's beautiful, but it's their territory, their rules. Maybe it's time to make my own rules somewhere else." Catherine smiled. "Now you're thinking like a survivor. But first, you need a safe place to plan your next steps. The guest house is yours for as long as you need it. It's on a separate property from my main house. Close enough for support, far enough for privacy." As we crossed the Cooper River, leaving the peninsula and its weight of history behind, I felt something shift inside me. The smoke-scented air from my clothes no longer smelled like destruction. It smelled like freedom. Every possession Eleanor had burned was one less thing tying me to a life that had slowly been suffocating me. "You know what the strangest part is?" I said, watching Charleston recede in my mirrors. "I actually feel grateful to Eleanor in a way. By trying to destroy everything that made me who I am, she showed me exactly who I need to be." Catherine glanced at me, understanding in her eyes. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. Trust me. I know. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge?" I thought about my mother's rescued cookbook, about my small box of treasures, about the jade pendant that had survived Eleanor's purge. They weren't just possessions anymore. They were seeds of a new life, one I would build on my own terms. First, I said, I'm going to eat whatever Martha packed in this kitchen towel, then I'm going to call my parents and tell them everything. And after that, I took a deep breath, tasting freedom. After that, I'm going to start painting again. Catherine's guest house was everything the Sullivan mansion wasn't. Where Eleanor's domain had been all antiques and tradition, this space was modern, bright, and wonderfully untethered to the past. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a small private garden, and the walls were decorated with vibrant contemporary art. Some of it, I noticed, signed by Catherine herself. It's not exactly Sullivan-approved decor, Catherine said, watching me take in the space. But then again, that's rather the point. She set my small box of rescued possessions on a sleek coffee table. The kitchen's stocked. There's a computer in the office nook if you need it, and I put some clothes in the bedroom. We look about the same size. I turned to her, overwhelmed by the kindness. Catherine, I don't know how to thank you. She waved off my gratitude. Consider it my contribution to the Sullivan Survivors Club. We're a small but growing group. Her smile turned serious. Now let's see what Martha managed to save for you. We unwrapped the kitchen towel package on the counter. Inside was a curious assortment. My cell phone charger, which I hadn't even thought about in my escape, a small envelope of cash, my favorite tea blend, and surprisingly, a small watercolor set I'd hidden in the kitchen months ago. A note in Martha's neat handwriting read, "Some things are worth saving. Some traditions are worth breaking." Martha's been watching Eleanor destroy lives for 30 years, Catherine explained, examining the note. She's helped more than one Sullivan wife escape, though most didn't make it as far as you did. The implications of that statement hit me hard. How many others have there been? Catherine leaned against the counter, her expression distant. Too many. James's sister Claire was the most recent. You've met her, right? The nervous one who teaches piano lessons from Eleanor's garage apartment? At my nod, she continued. She used to be a concert pianist, had a promising career ahead of her, until she married into the family. Eleanor convinced her that professional performances weren't suitable for a Sullivan wife. My hand shook as I set down my mother's cookbook. I had no idea. She seems so broken, Catherine supplied. That's what happens when you let Eleanor Sullivan remake you. But you, she pointed at me with a decisive gesture. You got out before she could finish the job. The question is, what are you going to do with your freedom? I sank onto one of the modern bar stools, the events of the day finally catching up with me. I honestly don't know. Everything I owned is gone. My job, my art supplies, my clothes, my voice caught. Even my wedding ring burned in that fire. Good riddance to Sullivan's shackles, Catherine said firmly. But you're wrong about everything being gone. Your teaching certification is still valid, isn't it? Your talent didn't burn in that fire. Your spirit, the one Eleanor tried so hard to break, is still very much alive. She had a point. Eleanor might have burned my possessions, but she couldn't burn away my education, my skills, my determination. I thought about my small savings account, the one thing I'd managed to keep secret. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I should call my parents, I said, reaching for my phone. They need to know what happened. Catherine nodded. Use the landline if you need to. Eleanor's probably already tried to poison every Sullivan contact against you, and in this town, that's a lot of people. Best to keep your cell number private for now. As if on cue, my phone lit up with messages. Dozens of them from James, from Sullivan family members, from the social circle Eleanor had so carefully curated for me. I turned the phone off without reading any of them. The landline felt solid and real in my hand as I dialed my parents' number in California. It rang twice before my mother's voice, warm and familiar, answered. Hello? Mom? My voice cracked. I need to tell you something. Everything's changed. For the next hour, I told my parents everything. The gradual erosion of my independence, Eleanor's escalating control, the final dramatic confrontation and burning of my possessions. My mother listened in silence, but I could hear my father's muffled exclamations in the background. We'll be on the next flight, Mom said when I finished. You shouldn't be alone right now. Actually, I said, surprising myself. I think I need to do this part on my own. But knowing you're there, knowing you understand, that means everything. After saying goodbye, I found Catherine in the garden, setting up an easel. I thought you might want to start reclaiming your art, she said, gesturing to the fresh canvas and paints she'd arranged. Sometimes the best way to process trauma is to create something new from it. I touched the canvas hesitantly, feeling its texture. How long had it been since I'd really painted, not just made the decorative pieces Eleanor deemed acceptable? The white surface seemed to pulse with possibility. What should I paint? I asked, picking up a brush. Catherine smiled. Paint your freedom, paint your anger. Paint the woman Eleanor tried to erase but couldn't. Paint whatever you damn well please. That's the whole point. As the sun set over Mount Pleasant, casting long shadows across the garden, I made my first brushstroke. The color was red as the silk dress Eleanor had burned, as red as the fury and passion she'd tried to stamp out of me. It felt like drawing a line between my old life and my new one, between the woman I'd pretended to be and the woman I was ready to become. The first week in Catherine's guest house passed in a blur of painting and processing. I'd wake early, still conditioned to prepare for Eleanor's inspections, only to remember that no one would be checking my table settings or critiquing my choice of breakfast china. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. Catherine had introduced me to her circle of friends, what she jokingly called the Charleston Resistance. There was Mara, a divorce attorney who specialized in helping women escape controlling marriages. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation, a therapist who understood the particular trauma of cultural erasure. And Diana, an art gallery owner who'd survived her own high society exodus. The Sullivans aren't the only family in Charleston with a tradition of control, Diana explained one evening as we sat in her gallery after hours. She'd invited me to see her latest exhibition featuring artists who'd broken free from various societal constraints. They're just the most systematic about it. I was studying a particularly powerful piece, a woman emerging from a chrysalis made of social expectations, when Diana dropped a bomb. You know, I've been looking for someone to teach art classes here at the gallery. Someone who understands both technique and the therapeutic value of creative expression. The offer caught me off guard. I haven't taught since before my marriage, Eleanor made sure. Eleanor is not in charge anymore, Diana interrupted firmly. And from what Catherine tells me about your work, you're exactly what we're looking for. The idea of teaching again, of helping others find their voice through art, made my heart race with possibility, but fear crept in too. The Sullivans have a lot of influence in Charleston if Eleanor found out. Let her find out, Mara chimed in, looking up from the legal papers she was reviewing. In fact, I'm counting on it. The more she tries to interfere with your new life, the stronger our case becomes. I'd been hesitant about pursuing legal action, but Mara had convinced me to at least document everything. Emotional and financial. Abonne leaves traces, she'd explained. The destruction of your property, the isolation, the control over your finances, it all builds a pattern that courts are beginning to recognize. That night, as I worked on my latest painting in Catherine's garden studio, Dr. Chen stopped by for what she called a casual check-in. She had a way of creating safe spaces for difficult conversations. How are you really doing? She asked. Studying my canvas. I'd been painting a series of women emerging from various forms of confinement, boxes, cages, even perfectly appointed dining rooms. I'm angry, I admitted, adding another fierce stroke of color, not just about my things being burned, but about the years I lost trying to become someone else, about how close I came to disappearing completely. Dr. Chen nodded. That anger is valid. It's also fuel for your recovery. But be careful it doesn't become another prison. What do you mean? Sometimes when we escape one form of control, we let our anger at that control define us. The goal isn't just to break free from Eleanor's vision of who you should be. It's to discover who you want to be. Her words hit home. Who did I want to be now that I was free to choose? The answer began taking shape in my mind like a painting emerging from a blank canvas. Later that evening, Catherine hosted what she called a survivor's dinner in her main house. The table settings would have given Eleanor heart palpitations, mismatched vintage plates, casual centerpieces, and not a proper fish fork in sight. The conversation flowed freely, touching on art, politics, and personal histories. I got a call from Claire today, Catherine announced as we finished our decidedly unsullivan-like takeout Thai food, James's sister. She's been following your story through Martha, and she's thinking about leaving too. The news sent a ripple through the group. Claire, the perfect cautionary tale of Sullivan control, considering escape? She'll need support, Mara said thoughtfully. The longer you've been under that kind of control, the harder it is to break free. She'll have support, Diana declared. All of us. We should start a formal network, something to help other women in similar situations. The idea took root as we sat around Catherine's table. Each woman brought her expertise. Mara's legal knowledge, Dr. Chen's therapeutic insights, Diana's connections in the art world, and my fresh perspective on breaking free from the Sullivan machine. We could use the gallery as a front. Diana suggested excitement building. Art classes that are really support groups, exhibitions that tell stories of breaking free, a safe space for women to discover their own voices. Eleanor would hate it, I said, laughing despite myself. An organization dedicated to dismantling everything she stands for, right here in her precious Charleston. That's exactly why. It's perfect, Catherine grinned. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and helping others do the same. As I looked around the table at these strong, supportive women, I realized I'd found something I never had in the Sullivan family, genuine connection. These women didn't care about maintaining appearances or upholding rigid traditions. They cared about truth, growth, and supporting each other. I want to help, I said firmly, Not just with Claire, but with anyone else trapped in similar situations. I want to turn what happened to me into something meaningful. Dr. Chen smiled. That's often how healing works best, when we use our experiences to light the way for others. The evening ended with practical planning. Diana would set up the art class program. Mara would create a legal resource guide. And Dr. Chen would develop a support group framework. I would tell my story, teach art, and help others find their creative voice again. As I walked back to the guest house under the Charleston stars, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Eleanor had tried to burn away everything that made me who I was. But from those ashes, something stronger was emerging. Not just a survivor, but a guide for others seeking their own path to freedom. 2 weeks after the Sunday brunch that changed everything, I stood in front of Diana's gallery preparing for my first art class. The flyer in the window read, "Art as Liberation, Finding Your Voice Through Creative Expression." Innocent enough to avoid Sullivan's suspicion, but clear enough for those who needed it. Inside I'd set up easels in a circle, breaking every rule of formal art instruction Eleanor had tried to drill into me. No rigid rows, no proper distance measurements, no predetermined subjects to paint. Just open space, fresh canvases, and permission to create freely. "Nervous?" Diana asked, helping me arrange supplies. She'd invested in quality materials, paints, brushes, and canvases that would have made Eleanor sniff about wasting good money on amateur pursuits. "A little," I admitted, adjusting a jar of brushes. "It's been so long since I taught, and this is different from elementary school art classes." "Different is good," she said firmly. "Different is exactly what these women need." The students began arriving. 5 women, each carrying her own story of control and constraint. Claire wasn't among them. She wasn't ready yet. But Martha had spread the word through her network of household staff, reaching women who needed an escape, even if just for a few hours. I recognized the signs in them that I'd seen in myself, the careful way they moved as if always being watched, the instinctive glances over their shoulders, the apologetic smiles when taking up space, or expressing an opinion. One woman, Patricia, still wore her pearls and perfectly pressed dress, though her hands shook slightly as she picked up a brush. "Welcome," I said, my teacher's voice coming back naturally. "Today, we're not going to focus on technique or proper form. We're going to paint feelings, specifically, the feeling of breaking free." Patricia's hand shot up, proper even in rebellion. "But how do we know if we're doing it right?" The question could have come from my own lips 3 weeks ago. "That's the beauty of it," I explained. "There is no right way to break free. Your liberation is yours alone to express." For the next 2 hours, I watched as these women began to find their voices through color and form. Some started hesitantly, making small, careful strokes. Others attacked their canvases with years of pent-up emotion. Patricia's pearl necklace ended up splattered with paint, and her smile when she noticed was worth everything. Dr. Chen observed from the corner, ostensibly working on paperwork, but really watching for signs of emotional distress. She'd helped me design the class to be therapeutic without being obviously therapy. As the session wound down, one of the women, Sarah, lingered over her canvas. She'd painted what looked like a bird's nest made of broken chains. "My husband's family," she said quietly. "They have all these rules about how a wife should behave, what she should wear, how she should speak. Last week I wore red lipstick to church just to see what would happen." Small acts of rebellion. I remembered them well. The hidden art supplies, the secret bank account, the tiny ways I'd tried to maintain my identity under Eleanor's regime. "The lipstick looked wonderful on you," said another woman, Rebecca, who I learned later was in Sarah's church congregation. No matter what Mrs. Holbrook said about it being inappropriate for a Christian woman, connections were forming, support networks growing organically. These women were finding not just their artistic voices but their allies. After class, as we cleaned up, Diana showed me something she'd been working on, a proposal for a full exhibition titled, "Phoenix Rising, Women's Stories of Resurrection." "I want to feature your work," she said, alongside pieces from other women who've broken free. Not just from controlling families, but from any situation that tried to silence their creativity. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. Eleanor would see it. The whole Sullivan family would know. "Exactly." Diana's eyes sparkled. "Let them see. Let them witness the beauty that emerges when women refuse to be controlled. Besides," she added with a grin, "scandal is good for gallery attendance." That evening, during our now regular dinner with the resistance group, I shared news that had been building all day. I'd gotten a call from the head of the art department at a progressive private school in Mount Pleasant. "They're looking for a full-time art teacher starting next semester," I said, still hardly believing it. "Diana recommended me." "Are you going to take it?" Catherine asked. Though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "I think I am." I took a deep breath. "It's exactly the kind of teaching I've always wanted to do, encouraging creativity, helping students find their unique voices." Everything Eleanor said wasn't suitable for a Sullivan wife. Mara raised her glass. 2 unsuitable careers, and the women brave enough to pursue them. Later, in the quiet of the guest house, I worked on my latest painting. A series of women rising from ashes, each one helping another up. As I painted, I thought about my students from today, about Claire still gathering her courage, about all the women still trapped in gilded cages of tradition and control. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of my burned possessions being cleared from the Sullivan garden, followed by the words, "You'll regret this defiance, Eleanor's latest attempt at intimidation." I showed the message to Catherine, who immediately documented it for Mara's legal file. But strangely, the threat didn't frighten me anymore. Eleanor had already done her worst. She'd burned everything I owned, tried to erase who I was, yet here I was, teaching again, painting again, helping others find their way to freedom. "You know what I've realized?" I said to Catherine as we added the message to our growing evidence file. "Eleanor's greatest fear isn't that I'll fail, it's that I'll succeed, that I'll prove a woman can thrive outside the Sullivan mold." Catherine smiled. "Then let's make her very, very afraid." The confrontation I'd been both expecting and dreading came on a Thursday afternoon at Diana's gallery. I was setting up for my 3rd art class, arranging easels and laying out supplies, when Eleanor Sullivan swept in like a perfectly coiffed hurricane. She wasn't alone. She'd brought reinforcements in the form of James and 2 other Sullivan matriarchs. "So this is what you've descended to." Eleanor's voice cut through the peaceful gallery space. Teaching finger painting to bored housewives, how predictably common. I straightened up from where I'd been arranging paintbrushes, feeling oddly calm. 3 weeks ago, her presence would have sent me into a panic. Now I simply felt sorry for her. "Hello, Eleanor," I said, continuing my preparations. "The gallery's closed for private classes right now. You'll have to come back during public hours." She ignored me, moving through the space like she was conducting a home inspection. Her fingers trailed along the edges of easels, checking for dust. James hovered uncertainly behind her, looking everywhere but at me. "I've been hearing disturbing rumors," Eleanor continued, "about you spreading lies, trying to turn other women against their family's traditions, even encouraging Claire to abandon her responsibilities." Ah, there it was. Claire had finally told her mother about our conversations, about her dreams of returning to music. I kept my voice steady. "Interesting that you see women making their own choices as abandonment of responsibility." Choices, Eleanor's laugh, was sharp as broken crystal. "You're poisoning vulnerable women with your California ideas about independence, a Sullivan woman." "I'm not a Sullivan woman anymore," I interrupted, surprised by the strength in my voice. "And neither is Claire, really. You made sure of that when you broke her down piece by piece until there was nothing left but an echo in a garage apartment." Eleanor's face flushed. "How dare you? Everything I've done has been to maintain standards, to preserve our way of life." "James, tell her." But James remained silent, still studying the gallery's hardwood floors as if they held the secrets of the universe. I noticed he'd lost weight, and his normally immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled. Living under Eleanor's full attention without me as a buffer must be taking its toll. "Your way of life," I said quietly, "is built on breaking women, on turning them into perfectly polished mirrors that reflect only what you want to see. But I'm not a mirror anymore, Eleanor, and soon, other women won't be either." She moved closer, her Chanel perfume mixing with the paint smell in the air. "Is that a threat?" "No. It's a promise. An invitation even. The world is changing, Eleanor. Women are realizing they don't have to disappear to be worthy of respect." "Respect?" She spat the word. "You want to talk about respect? You abandoned your home, your husband, your position in society, and now you're trying to corrupt others with your rebellion." I was about to respond when movement at the gallery door caught my attention. My students were arriving, including Sarah, still wearing her pearls, but now paired with bright red lipstick, and Patricia, whose perfectly pressed dress had been replaced by comfortable painting clothes. They froze at the sight of Eleanor, some instinctively shrinking back. But then something remarkable happened. Rebecca, who I'd learned was from one of Charleston's oldest families, stepped forward. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, her voice quavering but determined, "I believe the class is about to begin, unless you're here to paint?" Eleanor turned, ready to deliver one of her cutting remarks, but stopped short. She recognized these women, pillars of Charleston society, wives and daughters of her peers, women who were supposed to be safely controlled by tradition and expectation. Rebecca Holbrook. Eleanor's voice dripped false sweetness. "Does your mother-in-law know you're here?" "I'm sure she'd be interested in how you're spending your Thursday afternoons." "I'm sure she would be," Rebecca replied, lifting hers chin. "Just like I'm sure she'd be interested in who really caused her prized roses to fail at last year's garden show." Eleanor's face went pale. Behind her, one of her accompanying matriarchs shifted uncomfortably. I watched the power dynamic shift in real time, as Eleanor realized these women had secrets of their own. Secrets they were no longer afraid to use. More women were arriving now, including some I didn't recognize. Word of our art therapy. Sessions had spread through Charleston's hidden networks of housekeepers, garden clubs, and church groups. Each woman who entered stood a little straighter, drawing strength from the others. "You see, Eleanor," I said softly, "you can burn my possessions, destroy my marriage, even try to erase who I am. But you can't stop other women from seeing what you did, from recognizing the pattern, from choosing something different for themselves." "This is absurd," Eleanor snapped, but her voice had lost its edge of certainty. "James, we're leaving. This display is beneath us." But James wasn't looking at the floor anymore. He was looking at my latest painting, prominently displayed on an easel. A phoenix, rising from the ashes of a burning pile of clothes and memories. Its wings made of broken chains and shattered teacups. "Did you paint this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said simply. "It's part of Diana's upcoming exhibition. Phoenix Rising, Women's Stories of Resurrection. You should come to the opening. See what happens when women stop trying to fit into spaces that were designed to contain them." Eleanor grabbed James's arm, but he shook her off gently but deliberately. It was the first time I'd ever seen him resist her physical control. "We're done here," Eleanor announced, but her usual authority rang hollow in the gallery filled with women who were learning to see through her facade. As she swept toward the door, her cultural warriors in tow, she turned for one last shot. "You'll regret this, Rachel. All of you will. This isn't how things are done in Charleston." "No," I agreed, picking up a paintbrush. "This is how things are changing in Charleston." "Ladies," I turned to my students, my voice steady and clear. "Shall we begin?" The art class that followed Eleanor's dramatic exit was unlike any we'd had before. The energy in the room crackled with a mixture of fear, defiance, and something else, hope. As we painted, women began sharing their stories, each one a different version of the same theme, the slow erosion of self, under the weight of societal expectations. "I used to play jazz piano," Patricia confessed as she worked on a canvas swirling with musical notes and broken chains. "But my husband's family said it wasn't appropriate for charity ball performances. Now I only play classical pieces at their approved events. My mother-in-law reorganizes my kitchen every time she visits," Sarah added, her brushstrokes becoming bolder as she spoke. "Says I'll never be a proper hostess if I can't even arrange my spices correctly." Dr. Chen, who had witnessed Eleanor's visit and stayed to observe the class, noticed how each shared story seemed to release something in the others. "This is how healing often works," she explained later during our evening debrief. "One person's courage in speaking their truth gives others permission to acknowledge their own." Back at Catherine's guest house that evening, I found myself unable to sleep, my mind replaying the confrontation with Eleanor. I set up my easel in the moonlit garden and began to paint. This time, instead of flames and ashes, I found myself painting windows. Dozens of them. Some broken, some opening, some still shuttered. Catherine found me there as dawn was breaking. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, bringing out 2 cups of coffee. "I kept thinking about the look on James's face when he saw my Phoenix painting," I admitted, accepting the coffee. "It was like he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in years." "He's not the only one seeing things clearly for the first time," Catherine said. Eleanor's visit to the gallery was the talk of the garden club this morning. Apparently, several prominent Charleston ladies have suddenly developed an interest in art therapy. I added another window to my painting, this one with its shutters half open. "Eleanor will try to stop them. She'll use every bit of social influence she has." "Oh, she's already trying," Catherine grinned. "But she's fighting a losing battle. You see, the thing about control is that once people start questioning it in one area of their lives, they tend to question it everywhere." That afternoon, I had my regular session with Dr. Chen. We'd moved from emergency crisis counseling to deeper work on understanding patterns and building healthy boundaries. "Tell me about the windows you're painting," she said, noting how the theme appeared in my recent work. "They're about perspective, I think," I said slowly. "About how Eleanor tried to control not just what I did, but how I saw the world. Each window represents a different way of seeing. Her way, my way, the way I pretended to see things to survive. And now? Which window represents how you see things now?" I thought about the confrontation in the gallery, about the strength I'd found in standing my ground. I'm not looking through any of their windows anymore. I'm creating my own view. The next day brought an unexpected visitor to my afternoon. Art class. Claire, James's sister, slipped in just as we were starting. She looked terrified but determined, clutching a worn music book to her chest like armor. "I heard about what happened yesterday," she said quietly. "About Mother's visit. I want to learn to paint too." The other women in the class immediately made space for her, someone offering an extra easel, another sharing their paints. They recognized another survivor joining their ranks. As Claire struggled with her first attempts at painting, her hands shaking slightly, she began to talk. "I have a concert pianist friend in New York," she said. "She's been asking me to come visit, maybe even play a small recital at her studio." She looked up, her eyes both fearful and hopeful. Do you think I could? Before I could answer, Patricia spoke up from her easel. I have an apartment in New York for shopping trips, you know. You could stay there. No one would have to know at first. I could help you practice, Sarah offered. My piano's gathering dust anyway, and it would drive my mother-in-law crazy to hear jazz coming from my house. I watched as the women naturally formed a support network, each offering what they could to help another break free. This, I realized, was what Eleanor feared most. Not just individual acts of rebellion, but women coming together, supporting each other, creating change. That evening, Mara brought news from her legal connections. Eleanor's been making inquiries about getting your marriage to James annulled, she said during our strategy dinner. Says you entered into it under false pretenses, never intending to uphold Sullivan traditions. Can she do that? I asked, though the idea of Eleanor trying to erase even the memory of my marriage seemed sadly in character. She can try, Mara smiled. But here's the interesting part. James hasn't signed anything. Apparently he's been too busy with work to meet with the family lawyers. I thought about James's face in the gallery, about how he'd pulled away from Eleanor's grasp. Small acts of resistance, like red lipstick at church or jazz music through open windows, seeds of change taking root in unexpected places. Later, working on my window painting, I added one final detail. A bird perched on a windowsill, its wings spread wide, neither inside nor outside, but in the act of choosing its direction. Dr. Chen would probably have something to say about the symbolism, but to me, it simply felt true. I was no longer trying to fit through Eleanor's approved windows, or view life through her carefully curated frames. I was building my own openings to the world, and helping others find theirs. The view wasn't always perfect or peaceful, but it was authentically mine. The news spread through Charleston's social circles like wildfire. Claire Sullivan had booked a plane ticket to New York. It wasn't just any ticket. It was a one-way flight to freedom scheduled for the week after Diana's Phoenix Rising exhibition opening. The timing wasn't coincidental. Are you sure about this? I asked Claire during one of our private art therapy sessions. She'd been coming to the gallery daily now, splitting her time between painting and practicing piano on the small upright Diana had brought in specifically for her. Claire's hands, usually trembling, were steady as she worked on her canvas. She'd been painting a series of birds in cages, each one progressively more detailed, more aware of its surroundings. Today's bird was looking directly at the cage door. I haven't been sure about anything in years, she said quietly. But watching you stand up to Mother in the gallery that day, it was like seeing a different way of existing, a way that doesn't require disappearing. Word of Claire's planned escape had reached Eleanor, of course. The Sullivan matriarch's response was swift and multi-pronged. First came the threats, cutting off Claire's access to her trust fund, removing her from the family registry, even suggesting she might need psychiatric intervention for her unstable behavior. When those didn't work, Eleanor switched tactics. She began showing up at Claire's garage apartment with old family photos, guilt-tripping her with memories of happier times when everyone knew their place. She even tried to have Claire's piano removed for necessary repairs, but Eleanor hadn't counted on the network of support that had grown around her daughter. Patricia's offer of her New York apartment had evolved into a complete escape plan. Sarah had connected Claire with her cousin who taught at Juilliard. Even Martha, still officially loyal to the Sullivan household, had begun secretly packing Claire's most precious possessions, moving them item by item to Catherine's guest house for safekeeping. The thing about controlling people, Dr. Chen observed during one of our sessions, is that they never expect their tactics to be used against them. Eleanor's so focused on watching the obvious exits, that she's missing all the side doors we're opening. The exhibition preparations became our cover for increasingly frequent strategy meetings. While Eleanor's spies watched the gallery's front door, reporting back on who attended my art classes, we were building something bigger in the back room. A formal organization dedicated to helping women break free from controlling families. Diana had secured non-profit status for what we were calling the Phoenix Network. Mara had drafted legal frameworks for providing assistance without risking liability. Dr. Chen had developed a comprehensive therapy program that could be disguised as art classes or book clubs. It's not just about getting out, Mara explained, during one planning session. It's about having a sustainable path forward, financial independence, emotional support, practical skills, everything Eleanor and others like her try to prevent women from developing. I thought about my own journey, how each small step away from Eleanor's control had required not just courage, but practical resources. The secret bank account, Catherine's guest house, the support network that had formed around me. We need to be careful, Catherine warned. Eleanor's already trying to get my gallery boycotted by Sullivan-affiliated societies. She'll do worse if she realizes what we're really building here. But Eleanor's attempts at social pressure were having an unexpected effect. Each time she tried to enforce her will through traditional channels, more women began questioning those traditions. Every garden club meeting she dominated, every charity board she tried to control, created new cracks in the facade of acceptable Southern society. One afternoon, I arrived at the gallery to find an elegant older woman waiting outside. I recognized her immediately, Virginia Hayward, one of Charleston's most influential social arbiters and a longtime Sullivan ally. "Mrs. Hayward," I said, cautiously, "the gallery doesn't open for another hour." "I'm not here for the gallery, dear," she said, her voice carrying decades of carefully cultivated Southern gentility. "I'm here about my granddaughter. She's in a situation not unlike what you faced. And I find myself questioning traditions I've upheld my entire life." It was a pivotal moment. A member of Eleanor's own social circle reaching out for help. As I listened to Mrs. Hayward describe her granddaughter's situation, I realized how far the ripples of my stand against Eleanor had spread. That evening, I added a new element to my window painting, reflections in the glass showing not just the viewer, but the wider world beyond. Each window became not just an opening, but a mirror, showing both escape and possibility. "You're not just helping them escape," Dr. Chen noted when I described the painting. "You're helping them envision a different way of being in the world." The truth of her words hit home when Claire showed up at the gallery the next day, her face glowing with an unfamiliar emotion, joy. She'd just finished her first proper piano practice in years, playing jazz pieces that Eleanor had forbidden. "I remembered who I used to be," she said, sitting down at her easel. "Not the proper Sullivan daughter, but the girl who loved music more than anything. The one mother tried to erase." As I watched her paint, her strokes confident and free, I thought about all the women still trapped in their own versions of Eleanor's change. The exhibition would be more than just a display of art. It would be a beacon showing others that escape was possible, that support was available, that change could happen. "We should add a musical component to the opening," Diana suggested when I shared Claire's breakthrough. "Let her play what she wants, how she wants. Show Eleanor that her control ends where our courage begins." The idea took root, growing into something larger. The exhibition would now include not just paintings but performances, poetry readings, dance, any form of expression that had been denied or controlled. A celebration of everything Eleanor had tried to suppress displayed right in the heart of her carefully controlled Charleston society. As we planned, I could almost hear Eleanor's reaction, her voice sharp with disapproval. "This isn't how things are done." But that was exactly the point. We weren't just breaking free from control. We were creating new ways of doing things, new traditions based on support rather than suppression. 1 month before the exhibition opening, I finally moved out of Catherine's guest house. My new apartment was nothing like the Sullivan mansion, a sunny third-floor walk-up in a converted Victorian near the art school where I'd started teaching full-time. The walls were painted in colors Eleanor would have deemed garish, and my furniture was an eclectic mix of thrift store finds and pieces donated by my expanding circle of supporters. "It's perfect," Catherine declared, helping me hang a massive abstract canvas, my first completed work after leaving the Sullivan house. "Eleanor would absolutely hate it." "That's not why I chose it," I said. Though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Every bright color, every unconventional choice, felt like a small victory over the woman who'd tried to burn away my identity. The apartment became more than just my home. It evolved into an unofficial headquarters for what we now called the Phoenix Network. Women would drop by under the pretense of art lessons or coffee dates, each one carrying her own story of control and resistance. Mrs. Hayward's granddaughter, Emily, became a regular visitor. She'd escaped her controlling fiancé's family with her grandmother's help, and was now helping us create a guide for other women planning their exits. "The little things trip you up," she explained, as we worked on the manual, like remembering to change your bank passwords, or knowing where to forward your mail. The Phoenix Network grew more organized with each passing week. Mara had connected us with a women's shelter in Columbia that could provide emergency housing for those who needed to leave Charleston entirely. Dr. Chen had recruited other therapists willing to provide services discreetly. Even Martha Still, working in the Sullivan household, had become our eyes and ears in Charleston's domestic staff network. One rainy Tuesday, Claire arrived at my apartment in tears. Eleanor had made her final move, an ultimatum delivered over their weekly mother-daughter tea. She said if I go to New York she'll tell everyone I had a nervous breakdown. Claire sobbed on my couch. "She'll have me declared mentally unfit to manage my trust fund. She's already talked to the family lawyer." I held her while she cried, remembering my own moments of doubt and fear. But this Claire was different from the broken woman I'd first met. After a few minutes, she sat up, wiping her eyes. "I'm still going," she said firmly. "I'd rather be broken free than rich and caged." She wouldn't be broke, though. Our network had made sure of that. Patricia had already lined up piano students for her in New York. Sarah's cousin at Juilliard had arranged an audition for a teaching position. Even Mrs. Hayward had secretly set up a separate account for her, away from Sullivan control. The exhibition preparations accelerated as opening night approached. Diana had transformed the gallery into a testament to liberation. My paintings hung alongside works from other survivors, each piece telling its own story of breaking free. Claire's piano had been moved to a central position where she would perform for the first time in years. Eleanor will try to stop this, Catherine warned during our final planning meeting. She won't let Claire perform publicly without a fight. Let her try, Diana said, her voice hard. Every move she makes just proves why this exhibition is necessary. Eleanor's attempts at sabotage began subtly. Anonymous calls to the galleries, insurance company raising concerns about liability issues, pressure on local arts patrons to withdraw their support, whispered suggestions that attending the opening might affect social standing in Charleston society. But something had shifted in Charleston's social landscape. For every patron Eleanor frightened away, 2 more stepped forward. Women who'd been silenced by tradition were finding their voices. Even some of the old guard, like Mrs. Hayward, were quietly choosing sides. James appeared at my apartment one evening, looking uncomfortable in the bohemian setting. He'd lost more weight, and his perfect Sullivan polish had definitely faded. Mom's planning something for the opening night, he warned. I don't know what, but she's been making calls, having secret meetings. She's desperate to stop this. I studied my soon-to-be ex-husband, seeing him clearly. Why are you telling me this, James? He looked around my apartment, taking in the bright colors, the artwork, the evidence of a life lived authentically. Because I've been watching Claire come alive again. Because maybe Mom's way isn't the only way. Because he hesitated. Because you were right about being erased. After he left, I added a new element to my window painting. A reflection showing not just the viewer and the world beyond, but the shadows of others gathering, preparing to step through their own openings to freedom. The night before the exhibition opening, I hosted a final gathering in my apartment. Claire played jazz on my small upright piano, her music floating out the open windows into the Charleston night. Patricia had abandoned her pearls for a bright silk scarf. Sarah wore red lipstick like war paint. Emily brought homemade spring rolls, a recipe her controlling ex-future mother-in-law had deemed too ethnic for family dinners. We were an unlikely group. Society women and artists, rebels and reformers, all united by our refusal to be controlled. As I looked around at these women who had become my family, I realized we weren't just breaking free from Eleanor's cage. We were building something new and powerful in its place. Whatever Eleanor tries tomorrow, I told them, we're ready. We're not hiding anymore. Claire's fingers danced over the piano keys, playing a jazz interpretation of an old hymn that would have scandalized the Sullivan family. The music seemed to carry our collective defiance out into the night, a declaration of independence set to a rhythm Eleanor couldn't control. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, in my bright apartment filled with survivors and allies, I was exactly where I needed to be, free, strong, and surrounded by women who refused to disappear. The evening of the exhibition opening arrived with the kind of perfect Charleston weather Eleanor would have called providential, warm with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of jasmine. Diana's gallery glowed from within, each window a beacon in the gathering dusk. Inside, everything was ready. The paintings hung, the piano tuned, the stories waiting to be told. My centerpiece series, Windows of Liberation, commanded the main wall. The progression was clear. From the first painting of shuttered windows to the final piece showing a gathering of women stepping through their own openings to freedom. Beside it hung Claire's collection, Caged Melodies. Her journey, from silence to song, captured in vivid colors and bold strokes. They're already gathering outside, Catherine reported, peeking through the gallery's front curtains. And not just our invited guests. There's quite a crowd forming. I joined her at the window. The street was filling with people. Not just the expected art crowd, but women from all over Charleston. I recognized faces from my classes, from support group meetings, from quiet conversations in coffee shops and gardens. They came in pairs and small groups, some still wearing their junior league meetings clothes, others dressed in deliberately, UN Sullivan-approved attire. Eleanor's people are here too, Catherine noted, pointing to several well-dressed women clutching their pearls and programs with identical expressions of disapproval. She's deployed her full social artillery. But Eleanor herself was nowhere to be seen yet. We all knew she would make her entrance at the precise moment for maximum impact. It was the Sullivan way. Claire emerged from the back room where she'd been practicing, wearing a deep red concert dress that would have given her mother heart palpitations. I think I'm ready, she said, though her hands twisted nervously in her skirt. You are, I assured her, remembering my own journey from fear to freedom. We all are. Diana opened the gallery doors exactly at 7. The crowd flowed in like a river breaking through a dam. Society matrons mixing with artists, domestic staff with debutantes, all drawn by the promise of something breaking free in Charleston's carefully controlled social landscape. The reactions to the artwork were immediate and powerful. I watched as women stood before my window series, some crying quietly, others nodding in recognition. A group gathered around Patricia's collection of paintings titled, Proper Ladies Don't. Each piece showing a different act of rebellion against social constraints. Claire's first piano performance was scheduled for 8. As she took her place at the instrument, the gallery fell silent. This was more than a musical performance. It was a declaration of independence. The first notes of jazz filled the space, bold and unfettered. Claire had chosen a piece that began with the traditional classical theme, but evolved into something entirely her own. As she played, her body swaying with the music, I saw tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of release. That's when Eleanor made her entrance. She swept in with her usual entourage, but something was different. Her perfectly composed facade showed cracks, her hair slightly less immaculate, her lips pressed too tightly together. James followed behind her, his expression unreadable. Claire's music faltered for just a moment as she spotted her mother, then grew stronger, more defiant. The jazz rhythm pulsed through the gallery like a heartbeat of rebellion. Eleanor moved through the crowd like a shark through shallow water heading straight for Diana. "I demand you stop this immediately," she hissed, quiet enough to not cause a scene, but sharp enough to cut. "This display is a deliberate attack on Charleston's most respected families." Diana's smile was serene. "This is a private exhibition on private property, Eleanor. You're welcome to view the art or leave, but you have no authority here." "No authority?" Eleanor's voice rose slightly. "Do you have any idea who I am? Who we are? This gallery exists because we allow it to exist. One word from me to the right. People would only prove every point we're making," I interrupted, stepping forward. "Look around, Eleanor. Really look. Every woman in this room has a story about control, about being erased, about being forced to be someone she's not. You're not just fighting me anymore. You're fighting every woman who's tired of disappearing." The gallery had gone quiet except for Claire's music, which had shifted into a mournful blues piece. Eleanor turned slowly, taking in the crowd. She saw Mrs. Hayward standing proudly beside her granddaughter Emily. She saw her own garden club members studying Patricia's paintings with growing understanding. She saw Martha, still in her housekeeper's uniform, being offered champagne by one of Charleston's leading socialites. "This is unconscionable," Eleanor whispered. But the words lacked her usual conviction. "James, say something." James stepped forward, and for a moment, I thought he would take his mother's side as he always had. Instead, he walked to Claire's piano, standing beside his sister as she played. "The music is beautiful, Claire," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Dad would have loved it." The mention of her late husband seemed to physically rock Eleanor. She grabbed James's arm. "How dare you? Your father understood the importance of maintaining standards, of protecting our way of life." "Dad understood music," Claire said, her fingers still moving over the keys. "Remember how he used to sneak me jazz records? How he'd wink and tell me not to let you know? He never wanted me to stop playing, Mother. You did that. You did all of this." The truth of those words seemed to echo through the gallery. Eleanor's face went pale, then flushed. She looked around wildly seeking allies, but found only witnesses to her unraveling. "This isn't over," she declared. But her voice shook slightly. "You'll all regret this defiance." As she turned to leave, Claire launched into a new piece, one I recognized as their father's favorite jazz standard. The music followed Eleanor as she fled, carrying with it years of suppressed truth and emerging freedom. After she left, the exhibition seemed to exhale. Women began moving more freely, talking more openly. Stories were shared, connections made, silent struggles finally given voice. "Well," Catherine said, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. "I'd say, that's a success." I took the offered glass, watching as Claire finished her piece to thunderous applause. Around us, women were exchanging phone numbers, making plans, finding their voices and their allies. "It's more than a success," I replied. "It's a beginning." The Sunday after the exhibition opening dawned bright and clear. Perfect brunch weather. Instead of the formal Sullivan dining room, I found myself in my sunlit apartment surrounded by a very different kind of gathering. The table was set with mismatched plates and coffee mugs collected from thrift stores. No pressed linens or proper place settings in sight. Claire was there, glowing with excitement about her upcoming move to New York. Patricia had brought her famous jazz-inspired banana bread, a recipe that would have scandalized Eleanor's garden club. Sarah arrived wearing a bright red dress that made her look 10 years younger. Even Martha had come, having given notice at the Sullivan house the morning after the exhibition. The look on Eleanor's face, Martha chuckled, accepting a cup of coffee and a mug decorated with dancing cats. "You'd think I'd committed high treason instead of just quitting a job." "In Eleanor's world that is treason," Catherine observed. Arranging fresh flowers in a recycled wine bottle, another deliberate departure from Sullivan traditions. "Especially since you're coming to work for the Phoenix Network full-time." The network had grown beyond our wildest expectations. The exhibition had broken something open in Charleston society, creating space for honest conversations about control and freedom. Women who'd attended out of social obligation found themselves recognizing their own stories in the artwork. Those who'd come in secret found courage in numbers. Diana arrived late carrying news. "The gallery's been flooded with calls," she announced, helping herself to Patricia's banana bread. "Not just from Charleston, women from all over the row, South wanting to know how they can start their own Phoenix networks. Even got a call from a women's studies professor at Vanderbilt wanting to document what we're doing. As if to underscore Diana's words, my phone buzzed with a text from Emily, Mrs. Hayward's granddaughter. She'd started a support group at her church disguised as a book club. 6 women showed up, she wrote. 2 were making plans to leave controlling situations. Thank you for showing us it's possible. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find James standing there looking uncertain. He'd lost the stiff Sullivan posture, his bow tie replaced by an open collar. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said. Then stopped short at the sight of Claire at the table. Come in, I said, surprising myself. We're having anti-brunch. He entered cautiously, taking in the scene, the casual atmosphere, the laughter, the complete absence of Sullivan propriety. Claire got up and hugged him, something I hadn't seen them do in years. Mother's not taking things well, he reported, accepting a mismatched plate and some banana bread. She's called an emergency meeting of the Sullivan Family Trust Board, talking about changing the terms of inheritance to prevent any more rebellions. Let her, Claire said firmly. My plane ticket's bought. My New York students are lined up. I'm done letting fear of losing money control my life. James nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that too, about control, about what Dad would really have wanted for us. He pulled out an envelope. That's why I brought these. Inside were documents from the family lawyer. James was contesting Eleanor's attempt to freeze Claire's trust fund. Dad's will was clear, he explained. The money was meant to support us, not control us. Mother's interpretations won't hold up in court. As I watched James and Claire talk, really talk, for the first time in years, I thought about how far we'd all come from that Sunday when Eleanor had burned my possessions. The flames that were meant to destroy me had instead sparked a movement. Sarah's phone chimed with a message from her mother-in-law. She's deeply disappointed in my choice of dress for church this morning, she read, laughing. Says red isn't appropriate for a pastor's wife. I told her Jesus doesn't have a dress code. Speaking of inappropriate, Patricia added, I've been invited to play at the Christmas charity ball. I'm thinking of mixing some jazz into the classical program. Small acts of musical rebellion. Martha, who'd seen generations of Sullivan control firsthand, shook her head in wonder. Never thought I'd see the day. Charleston society ladies trading their pearls for rebellion. Eleanor must be having fits. Eleanor, Catherine observed, is facing her worst nightmare. Women who aren't afraid of her anymore. Women who are telling their stories and helping others tell theirs. As if summoned by her name, another text arrived. This one from Mrs. Hayward. Eleanor had apparently tried to have her removed from the Garden Club board for supporting disruptive elements in society. The attempt had backfired spectacularly when other board members sided with Mrs. Hayward. Times are changing, Mrs. Hayward wrote. Even in Charleston, women are tired of disappearing. I looked around my sunny apartment at this gathering of survivors and supporters. Every woman here had her own story of breaking free, her own journey from controlled to controller of her own destiny. Together, we were creating something Eleanor had never anticipated, a new kind of tradition built on support instead of suppression. To new traditions, I raised my coffee mug decorated with a phoenix rising. And to all the women still finding their way to freedom, the others raised their mismatched mugs in response. The gesture both a celebration and a promise. This was how change happened, not in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but in quiet Sunday gatherings where women could finally be themselves. On the morning Claire was set to leave for New York, I found myself back in front of the I. Sullivan house. I hadn't planned to come here. I was supposed to be helping with her last-minute packing. But something drew me to this place where my own journey of liberation had begun. The house looked exactly the same, its perfect paint and manicured lawns maintaining the illusion of Sullivan control. But now I could see the cracks in the facade, subtle signs that Eleanor's grip was loosening. The gardens showed signs of neglect since Martha's departure. The brass doorknobs had lost their usual mirror shine. As I stood there, a car pulled up beside me. It was James, looking tired, but somehow more real than he had in all our years of marriage. I thought I might find you here, he said, joining me in contemplation of his family home. Felt drawn to it myself today of all days. We stood in silence for a moment, each lost in our own memories of the life we'd tried to live behind those pristine walls. You know what I realized? James finally said. I can't remember the last time anyone was actually happy in that house. We were all too busy trying to be perfect. His words struck a chord. The Sullivan mansion had never been a home. It had been a stage set for Eleanor's carefully scripted production of proper Southern life. Every Sunday brunch, every social gathering, every family moment had been choreographed to maintain the illusion of Sullivan's superiority. Mother's talking about selling it, James continued. Says it's too big for her now, but I think she knows she's losing her audience. Half the society women she used to control are coming to your art classes, or joining the Phoenix network. I thought about the changes we'd seen in just a few months. Mrs. Hayward had transformed her traditional garden club into a subtle support group for women seeking independence. Patricia was teaching jazz piano to debutantes. Sarah had started a progressive wives book club that discussed female empowerment instead of flower arranging. "Do you remember," I asked, "that first Sunday when I tried to serve my mother's almond cookies alongside the traditional Sullivan desserts?" James nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. Mother was horrified. "But Dad actually liked them. He asked for the recipe when she wasn't looking." This was new information. "He did?" "Dad had his own small rebellions," James admitted. "He used to sneak Claire jazz records, took me to baseball games instead of the golf club. But after he died, Mother's control became absolute. It was easier to give in than to fight." A curtain moved in an upstairs window, Eleanor, watching us from her self-imposed isolation. Since the exhibition opening, she'd retreated from most social events claiming illness, but really avoiding the changing dynamics she could no longer control. "She's not well," James said softly. "Not physically. The doctors say she's fine. But losing control, watching her perfect world crumble, it's breaking her." I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Eleanor, for all her cruelty, was also a prisoner of the system she'd championed. She'd spent her life enforcing traditions that had probably crushed her own spirit long ago. "Maybe," I suggested, "she needs what we all needed, permission to be something other than perfect." James looked thoughtful. "I've been thinking about selling my share of the family law firm, opening a small practice like I wanted to before Mother convinced me it wasn't suitable for O'Sullivan." A memory surfaced. James in college, talking excitedly about helping regular people with real problems, not just managing trust funds and social appearances. That James had disappeared so gradually under Eleanor's influence that I'd almost forgotten he existed. "Claire's departure is hitting her hard," James continued. "But what really shocked her was Martha leaving. 30 years of service, and suddenly, Martha has her own dreams, her own plans. Mother can't understand it." "Martha's running the Phoenix Network's practical support services," I told him. "Teaching women basic life skills that controlling families never let them learn, budgeting, job hunting, even how to shop for themselves. She's amazing at it." We watched as another curtain twitched, Eleanor moving through her empty house, checking windows and straightening pictures that were already perfectly straight. "I should have stood up to her sooner," James said quietly. "Should have protected Claire, supported you. I never knew how." "None of us did," I replied. "That's why the network is so important. We're teaching each other how to be free." A text buzzed on my phone. Catherine reminding me that Claire was waiting. It was time to help another Sullivan break free. "Tell Mother," I said to James, as I turned to leave, "that the Phoenix Network has support groups for family members too. When she's ready to stop controlling and start healing, we'll be there." James looked surprised, then thoughtful. "You know what amazes me most about you? After everything she did, burning your possessions, trying to erase you, you still have compassion. That's what the network is about," I explained. "Breaking cycles of control, not perpetuating them. Eleanor tried to burn away everything that made me who I am. But in doing so, she just revealed who I really was, someone strong enough to help others find their strength." As I drove to Claire's garage apartment, I thought about how far we'd all come from that Sunday brunch when Eleanor had tried to enforce her will through fire. The flames that were meant to destroy me had instead forged something stronger, a network of support, a movement of liberation, a new way of being in a city steeped in tradition. In my rearview mirror, the Sullivan house grew smaller, its perfect facade no longer intimidating. Eleanor's power had always been based on isolation and fear. But she'd never understood that fire doesn't just destroy, it also illuminates, reveals, transforms. And sometimes, like the phoenix we'd chosen as our symbol, what rises from the ashes is more powerful than what was burned away. 6 months after Claire left for New York, I stood in Diana's gallery surrounded by a new exhibition. This one wasn't about breaking free. It was about what comes after freedom. The walls held stories of women rebuilding, rediscovering, reclaiming their lives. My latest series, After the Fire, hung in the center, showing the unexpected beauty that can grow from ashes. The Phoenix Network had expanded beyond anything we'd imagined. What started as a small group of Charleston women helping each other escape control, had grown into a regional movement. We had chapters in 5 southern states, each adapting our model to their local needs while maintaining the core mission, helping women find their voices and their power. Claire's story had become something of a legend in our network. Her first jazz concert in New York had been streamed live at the gallery, and we'd all watched with tears in our eyes as she played with a freedom and joy that Eleanor's control had nearly extinguished. She was teaching at a prestigious music school now, helping other musicians find their authentic voices, but the real surprise had come from an unexpected quarter. Eleanor Sullivan, the woman who had tried to burn away my identity, had finally reached her own breaking point. It happened gradually. First came the small changes. The Sullivan house's gardens allowed to grow slightly wild. The rigid Sunday brunch tradition quietly abandoned. Then Martha reported that Eleanor had been seen sitting alone in Claire's old practice room, listening to jazz records that had belonged to her late husband. The final catalyst came when James announced he was leaving the family firm to start his own practice focusing on women's legal rights. Eleanor had prepared for her usual battle of control, but somewhere between raising her voice and listing his familial obligations, she had simply stopped. It was like watching a puppet whose strings had been cut, James told me later. She sat down in Dad's old chair and said, "I don't know how to be any other way." That admission, small as it was, marked the beginning of Eleanor's own journey. She started attending therapy with Dr. Chen, though she insisted on calling it personal consulting. She even came to one of my art classes, sitting silently in the back, watching women express themselves without constraint. Today's exhibition opening was different from that first dramatic night that had changed so much. The crowd was larger, more diverse. Society women mixing easily with artists, activists and survivors. Patricia played jazz piano openly now, her music filling the gallery with the sound of freedom. Sarah had brought her whole church women's group, all wearing whatever colors they damned well pleased. And there, standing uncertainly in the doorway, was Eleanor. She looked smaller somehow, more human. The perfect Sullivan facade had cracked enough to let some reality show through. When she approached me, I noticed she wasn't wearing her usual pearls. "I've been looking at your new work," she said, her voice lacking its old sharp edge. "The piece about growth after destruction. It's quite powerful." Coming from Eleanor, this was practically a standing ovation. "Thank you," I replied simply. She glanced around the gallery, taking in the vibrant community that had grown from her attempt to enforce control. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, "about traditions, about control, about what I did to you, to Claire, to so many women." I waited, letting her find her words. "I'm not ready to. I don't know how to." She struggled, then straightened her spine. "Some habits die hard. The Sullivan House. I want to donate it to your network. It's too big for me now, and maybe it's time it helped women instead of confining them." The offer took my breath away. The Sullivan House, that symbol of control and tradition, transformed into a space for liberation and growth. The poetry of it was perfect. "We could use a proper headquarters," I said carefully. "Somewhere women could stay while they figure out their next steps. Somewhere with a music room perhaps, and space for art classes." A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Claire could play there again when she visits, and those cookies, the ones your mother taught you to make, they could be part of new traditions." It wasn't an apology in so many words, but from Eleanor Sullivan, it was a revolution. Later that evening, as the exhibition crowd mingled and celebrated, I added a final touch to my After the Fire series. A small painting of a door standing open, light streaming through, not a dramatic escape, but a quiet invitation to step into freedom. Martha, now the network's head of residential services, was already making lists of how to convert the Sullivan House into a women's center. "Full circle," she said, shaking her head in wonder. "That house spent generations keeping women in line. Now it'll help set them free." I looked around the gallery at all we had built from the ashes of that Sunday brunch, when Eleanor had tried to burn away my identity. Patricia was teaching another society matron to play jazz. Sarah was organizing a workshop on breaking free from religious control. Mrs. Hayward was quietly passing out Phoenix Network cards to women who showed signs of needing help. This was the real triumph, not just breaking free ourselves, but creating spaces where others could find their own paths to freedom. Every woman who stepped out of the shadows of control became a light guiding others forward. Eleanor had thought she could burn away everything that made me who I was. Instead, she had burned away everything that kept me from becoming who I was meant to be. Not just an artist or a teacher, but a beacon for others seeking their own liberation. The flames that were meant to destroy me had instead forged something unbreakable. A network of women supporting women, a movement of liberation spreading across the South, and the understanding that sometimes the most powerful traditions are the ones we create for ourselves. As I watched Eleanor finally accept a piece of Patricia's jazz-inspired banana bread, I smiled. Even the strictest controllers can learn to let go. Even the deepest wounds can become sources of strength. Even the hottest fires can forge new beginnings. And sometimes the very thing meant to break us becomes the foundation for building something stronger than we ever imagined possible. Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.
After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind, or maybe it has brought back some old memories. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories, and they connect all of us. Everyone has their own unique journey in life, and we all try to understand the world in our own way. These kinds of moments remind us that we are all human, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, and always learning something new. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it with your friends. Your thoughts and feedback are always valuable to us, as they motivate us to create even better content. Every story has its own unique angle, and our goal is to understand everyone's perspective and make our content diverse and relatable. Stories like these help us realize that life's journey is different for everyone, and by hearing other stories, we learn something new. You can also share your own stories with us. Your experiences are valuable to us as well, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave your feedback. We aim to create content that brightens your mind and gives you new ideas every time. If you've already seen this video before, your feedback is still important. With every piece of feedback, we can improve our content and bring a new perspective to our viewers. Today, what we saw was just a small part of the many stories shared on Reddit and across the world. It's a reminder of how we all try to understand life by sharing our experiences with each other. This video was only an example of how we try to connect with others through storytelling, learning about different sides of life. We hope to continue sharing such stories that help us all learn and grow together. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon. If you haven't already, please like and follow for more amazing content. Your support keeps us going, and we will strive to bring you more thought-provoking and heartwarming stories. Until next time, take care and stay curious. **